We can always see and experience what changes take place in our immediate surroundings. However, concepts like startups, innovations, and research are implemented over the world. And to throw some light on how these concepts are implemented at Western Sydney University, Australia, we have our first keynote speaker, Dr. Neil Perry, who is a senior research lecturer in corporate social responsibility and sustainability. Sir specializes in environmental economics and policy, cost-benefit analysis, and sustainable transitions for regional economies. Moreover, Dr. Neil has published widely in international scholarly journals and conducts funded research on startups, the strengths and opportunities for the manufacturing sector, and disruptive waste management and housing projects. Dr. Neil has been heavily involved in the 21st Century program and has created 3 new courses targeting startup companies, sustainability advocates, and innovative entrepreneurs that focuses on preparing students for a future of work that involves continuous disruption. Today, Sir will be addressing about Western Sydney University's program to revitalize the curriculum for the 21st century. I would now invite Dr. Neil to come and give his keynote speech.
Hello, everyone. I'm actually representing, I just wanted to mention first of all, I'm representing here Denise Kirkpatrick, who is our Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor. And she was recently appointed to the senior level, and that's basically why she couldn't make it. So I'm here on her behalf. I'm representing her, or she asked me to do it really, because I do funded research for startups, economic analysis, industry analysis for startups. And as was mentioned, I've designed some new coursework, which I'll mention later in this innovation kind of area. But I'm actually an economist. So I actually wanted to start off by setting the scene here with a bit of economic theory. And then I'm going to talk about the Global Innovation Index and how Australia does on that, talk about some impediments to innovation and startups in Australia, and then talk about, basically how we missed the boat in the sustainability area, and then talk about our kind of courses. So, look, to be honest, like as an economist, like 70 years ago, we really didn't have a really good idea about innovation in economics. We were still basing the idea of economic growth, that's growth in well-being, that's growth in our income per person. We were still basing that on just growth in capital and labour. But around 70 years ago, they started getting more data about economic growth, and they realised that that could explain just growth in labour and capital, like capital as in machinery, like this stuff, right? Machinery like this. Growth in that could only really explain about 15% of the economic growth that they were seeing, growth in per capita incomes. So they're going like, what else could be part of this? And that's when they started to introduce the idea of technology into economic growth theory. Solow won a Nobel Prize for that. But even then, that couldn't really explain the continuous kind of exponential growth that we see in economies. It could explain growth to the extent that it kind of diminished after a certain period of time. So you got little kind of periods of growth, but then that would diminish. So it's not really explaining society, what we see in reality. And that's when Römer came along. Römer also won the Nobel Prize not this year, the year before this year, in his work on endogenous growth theory. And what Römer said was he brought in the idea of ideas. So basically ideas come in as a kind of extra aspect to the production of growth in the economy, in addition to what he called objects, which is labour, capital, all the other materials in the economy. So you've got kind of, this labour and capital stuff growing, kind of continuously. But what you've got with ideas is something different. The ideas, of course, depend on the efforts of researchers and entrepreneurs, and that's why we're kind of bringing them together in this conference, I see. So ideas here are blueprints, they're designs, they're sets of instructions. And what's really unique about these ideas is that they're non-rival. Okay, so in economics, something's rival if, you know, it's like a bottle of water. If I drink it, no one else can drink it, right? But ideas, and I think we just heard that in our opening address, they can be used in multiple places at once, usually after an additional kind of period of patent or copyright or something like that, which is necessary as well to get the incentives to actually innovate. But beyond that, they can be used in multiple places at once. And what that means is that, you know, along with the kind of objects that are growing as well, capital and labour, you've got this situation where you can get exponential growth. You can get the continuous growth that we actually see in economies at the moment. So examples, of course, 3D computing, quantum computing, blockchain, and all those types of things that we see, they can be used in multiple different places at once. So non-rivalry leads to what we call in economics increasing returns to scale, and that's why Romer won a Nobel Prize, because he could explain this continuous growth in the economy through time. So if you double rival inputs like capital and non-rival inputs like ideas, then you more than double outputs, and that's what we see in the economy. Romer emphasised also, it was interesting that someone said monopoly, so he emphasised imperfect competition as being critical to this. So it's not just perfect competition that's required. The imperfect competition or monopoly is sometimes required to get the incentives, because that's how you reap the benefits of innovation, the profits that come from that. So that was an interesting addition there. So also, of course, institutions matter. Institutions have various different meanings, but in this respect, we're just talking about them as the things that cause the incentives for people to go out there and innovate and be entrepreneurs. So they're things like tax policy, R&D expenditure, education policy, and even just the number of innovators in the economy. So that comes down to a kind of cultural factor, like the number of innovators in the total stock of labour. Patents and intellectual property rights we've mentioned already. So that's a kind of economic theoretical background to innovation. And I think it's good to have that so we can kind of think about what's going on in Australia and elsewhere in India as well in terms of their development of an innovation economy. The Global Innovation Index, I think, is an interesting thing to look at. It looks at the inputs to creating an innovative economy and then measures how well they're doing in terms of outputs on various kind of measures. Australia does actually pretty well on the inputs. We're ranked as high as 15th, which is quite surprising. And you can see all the different aspects that we do pretty well in. Some aspects of education, our regulatory regime is not too bad. We've got a fair bit of stability in that, so that probably helps. We've got pretty sophisticated market as well, and those types of things. Good access to credit, ease of getting credit is very, very important. But we actually don't do all that well on the outputs. We rank 31st. Overall, it's about 22. I think India's around the 51 to 54 mark, somewhere around there. So we actually rank not too well in terms of the outputs. And particularly what Romer was talking about, that's growth in output per person, we're down at number 77, right? So our inputs then aren't leading to the outputs of innovation that should be happening. I mean, according to Romer's model, if you've got this kind of situation where there's good incentives for generation of ideas, which we've got, that's our inputs, right? But that should lead to outputs, but it's not really happening. Of course, the Global Innovation Index doesn't exactly match Romer, but you will see a lot of crossover between those theoretical developments and the construction of the Global Innovation Index. And there's some inputs we don't do well in. Government funding of secondary education, we're ranked pretty low, 89. Graduates in science and engineering is ranked pretty low, 77. But there's key things holding us back. And I just want to talk about 3 of those in particular. The first one is, I think, a lack of cluster development. And I don't think you've got that problem here. I think there's incredible clusters. But we're a very, very dispersed economy. We don't have a lot of, population density. And so we lose the kind of agglomeration economies, they're called. Agglomeration economies arise as businesses become closer together. Even in effective density, they might not even move together, but maybe the transport between them becomes better, and you get agglomeration economies. We use this kind of analysis in cost-benefit analysis a lot when we see new train lines come in or new roads come in. We say, well, people are effectively getting closer together, and then people have calculated what's the productivity responsiveness of getting closer together, right? And we use those figures to try and work out the benefits to some new road transport network. So the agglomeration economies, I think we've got a bit of a problem with. Secondly is the spillover benefits from really highly innovative companies. We've never really had that situation. And it's common kind of example of that is what's referred to as the PayPal mafia, which people that worked at PayPal then started all those incredible companies, right? So we never got those kind of spillover benefits from those really innovative companies. The third one is that some of our ideas, and that's due to a number of reasons, tend to flow overseas. So when we do generate new ideas in Roma's model, right, that's going to help your economy. But in our situation, they flow overseas into the US or other places. And that's due to things like a lack of government support, maybe a lack of funding at the initial level. There could be a problem there. Just basically small markets as well. We don't have a huge market in Australia, so they might be going overseas for that reason. So, of course, the government's trying to do some stuff to overcome this. The first thing is the Aerotropolis in my state of New South Wales, which is, and in Sydney. So we've got a new airport going in Western Sydney. And what they're trying to do is use that as a kind of catalyst to create big clusters around it. So they're bringing in big companies from overseas in the areas of aerospace, defence, agribusiness, medtech, and those types of things. They're bringing these big companies to try and become catalysts to bring in others, right? And they're going to have a network overseas in that situation because of the new airport. So that's one thing they're trying to do. We've got a lot of money going into advanced manufacturing, and what we're trying to do there is move the manufacturing sector away from just producing and into the design stuff. That's the new ideas development stuff, and also into the kind of services delivery part of the manufacturing process as well. So that's the advanced manufacturing. Education funding these days is very much linked to industry collaboration. So years ago, we were just writing our papers and sending them off to scholarly journals. These days, that doesn't give you any points whatsoever with the government. What they want to see is industry money coming into your university. And that's the only way that they'll then give you extra money. Basically, the government will then fund the institutions. So our particular institution, Western Sydney University, has a lot of inbuilt incentives for us to go out and get money from industry and develop research programs with them. There's the Australian Research Council, our federally government-funded research initiative, has programs where you can actually get the industries to provide money, and then the government doubles it or triples it if they put in in-kind work as well. So that's our ARC linkage programs. There remains to be seen whether this overcomes the barriers, and there are specific actions being called for that haven't really happened. So for example, startups in the kind of software area, there's a lot of uncertainty for those, because the R&D tax incentives aren't necessarily clear. Okay, so they're calling for some improved clarity in that particular area. They need to update, their copyright laws are really old, they need to update those and broaden the angel investor tax incentives to different startup types. So they're actually limited to only a few different types of startups. They're not broad, because they were scared there was going to be a massive amount of requesting for funding. So now that hasn't happened, they need to broaden that. There's a number of other things specifically that they might might do as well. And they also need to improve basic research funding, and that's something they're actually removing at the moment, because that's where the ideas are generated from. So I just wanted to also mention the area of ecologically sustainable development and innovation. We don't really do very well on that in the Global Innovation Index either. And we've got quite a few problems in that area. You might not know this, but we actually have quite poor environmental policy in Australia. We have poor land use and water use policy. We have absolutely no commitment to reducing global emissions. And yeah, we've just got a history of kind of high coal exports and stuff like that. This is significant because a very early paper in this kind of area of sustainable development by Porter, the Harvard economist Porter, pointed out that really strong environmental policy can be an excellent catalyst for innovation, right? It seems counterintuitive, but according to the companies that you ask, but if you actually have really strict policy and they've got to try and meet that policy, that drives them to innovate, right? And then they can kind of spread that innovation around the world and reduce costs and do various other things. So Australia's kind of missed the boat in that particular area. We could have started this a long time ago in the solar and wind. We've got abundant energy resources in solar and wind, and we haven't really exploited that. We've been pretty much fixated with kind of our coal exports and subsidising the fossil fuel sector. We've had quite partisan politics in this area, and that's really held us back. So these are some of the other impediments that come into that, the kind of vested interests and the impact of that on government policy. We've got a new mine, for example, starting up, which is crazy, a new coal mine, Adani actually, that's driven by Adani. So that's up in Queensland in this massive Galilee basin full of coal. So the government's really kind of going backwards in that particular area. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to finish really by talking about what Western Sydney University is doing. Of course, that's not going to show up in the Global Innovation Index, which is a kind of macro model, right? But we are hopefully playing a role in our local area to try and create some innovative thinkers and try to encourage the startups. The first one is Launchpad, and Inu Ran is representing Launchpad if you want to talk to her at some stage during the conference. They look after the startups. They're our incubator, our technology incubator. They look after our startups, and they work with around 250 companies. We did some analysis for them, economic modelling. We worked out that they're looking after about 270 local jobs, creating about 270 local jobs. There's only 2 or 3 of them looking after Launchpad. 270 local jobs, which translated into about 162 million Australian dollars for the local economy, and about 55 million in value added, which is the economists' measure of growth, basically, contribution to the economy. So that's a massive contribution from Launchpad. That's per year, and just from 2 or 3 individuals and a few buildings. Next, we've got this new 21st century curriculum project, and that's all around the future of work and preparing our students and others for a disrupted future of work. And what we're trying to do there is actually co-design, co-develop, and in some cases co-deliver our curriculum with industry. I've been heavily involved in this, particularly the bottom 2. The Bachelor of Entrepreneurship was already there, and a new teacher's into that. That's a 1-year bachelor's, so it's a end-on, what we call an end-on degree. So you do your Bachelor of whatever it is, Bachelor of Business, Bachelor of Science, whatever, and then you do an extra bachelor at the end, and it takes you through the kind of design process, creating, these kind of new companies and stuff like that, all the way through the process to the end. So that's one thing that we started. Last year we started the graduate diploma in startup scale-up, and what we noticed there, and I had a conversation with Rashid about this yesterday, was that our local companies sometimes don't have the skills to turn their ideas into a business, right? Or take their current business, their small, medium enterprise business, and really scale it up. So we're trying to create the skills that those companies need. We're trying to get them to come in and do some coursework, get some qualifications, but also get exposure to Launchpad, get taken through that kind of mentorship program and get them scaled up. The third one is a new sub-major in innovation, and that's something that I organised last year, and that's for undergraduate students. It's a small program that they can do, so they can do their Bachelor of Science or whatever, and then do this sub-major. And again, it takes them through that kind of process, exposes them to different elements of the innovation process, and gets industry involved. We actually had a startup innovator help us design the sub-major, and the students were going to go out there and work with them as well, right? Work with those people for like 60 hours or something like that to get some experience. And then that's ramping up now, this 21C program. So we're going to create, after that kind of initial thing, we also created one in sustainability. We're going to create another 8 this year, 8 new sub-majors. We've got different themes. We've got sustainability advocates, which I'm the champion for, and I very much see that as about innovation in energy and water and all these types of things. And then we've got innovative entrepreneurs, future thinkers, and global citizens are our other kind of curriculum challenges that we're creating. And then finally, our industry research funding is again driven by the government policy. They're only going to fund research if we actually go out and involve industry, but that's very much a priority at Western Sydney University. So it's a lot of the work that I do is actually funded by industry, and that's kind of good fun to do. You learn a lot from it. So yeah, basically that's it for me. I hope shed some light on what we're doing in Australia and at Western Sydney University. And what you can see, I think, is the need for these new ideas to drive economic growth, and that these can only happen if researchers and entrepreneurs come together. Thank you.
We would like to thank Dr. Neil Perry for sharing such insightful information with us. Well, not just a verbal thank you, I request Dennis sir to present a memento to Dr. Neil.